Welcome to the Vibes Lab, your front row seat to the science behind VIA, the Vibes AI agentic platform making everyday brain health accessible to all. Every episode is designed to reveal insights that will enhance your cognitive health and well-being. Follow us to grab your lab key and experience limitless intelligence.
Imagine a machine, right? Like a machine that was meticulously engineered and calibrated over, 300,000 years to run on a very specific type of fuel.
Okay, yeah, like a perfectly tuned engine.
Exactly. It operates perfectly. And then literally overnight, in evolutionary terms, you unplug it, you drag it indoors, you lock it in a closet, and you try to run it on like AAA batteries and a spotty Wi-Fi signal.
Well, I mean, you'd seen an almost immediate cascade of failures.
Right.
Yeah, the battery would drain exponentially faster. The internal cooling systems would just, fail entirely. And the core processor would just constantly overheat from trying to search for a signal it can't find anymore.
And that glitching machine is us. Welcome to today's deep dive.
It really is. It's a rough reality to face.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a fascinating synthesis of research today called Rooted in Resonance, the science of coming back to Earth.
It's such a brilliant collection of work.
Right. And our mission here is to uncover how the human nervous system is literally wired for the natural world. Like why modern life is essentially short-circuiting that ancient wiring. And most importantly, we want to look at the scientifically backed ways to actually heal it.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is the whole premise relies on understanding a biological mismatch.
Mm-hmm.
Because our autonomic nervous system, which is that, ancient subconscious part of us that governs the stress response or immunity digestion, it was precisely calibrated to process the really subtle signals of a natural environment.
Like wind or temperature changes, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It was absolutely not built for the relentless, high-decibel alarm of modern existence.
Yeah, the contrast laid out in these sources is just stark. I mean, we spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving outdoors. We physically touched the dirt, we breathed the complex chemistry of forest air, and our bodies literally synchronized with the sun.
Amen.
And now, the Environmental Protection Agency estimates the average person spends roughly 93% of their life indoors.
93%. I mean, just think about that. And while we are sitting indoors, we're actively feeding our nervous system signals of chronic danger.
Yeah, constantly.
Like the threat of a negative morning news headline. That activates the exact same neurological cascade as a physical threat in the wild.
Wait, seriously, just reading the news?
Oh, absolutely. There's research showing that reading negative news in the morning leads to significantly elevated cortisol responses to completely unrelated stressors later in that same day.
Wow.
Because the ancient architecture of the brain, it simply cannot tell the difference between a stalking predator and a terrifying push notification. It's the same alarm bell.
That's wild. I was actually looking at my own screen time data before we started recording, just, trying to quantify how many of those micro stressors I'm hitting every single day.
It's usually a pretty scary number when you actually check.
Oh, it was horrifying. For anyone listening to this right now, just think for a second about how many times you have reached into your pocket to check your phone today, just today.
Yeah, and if you're like the statistical average, you're checking that device between 96 and 144 times a day.
Which is just insane.
It is. And every single one of those checks is a potential jolt to the nervous system. So that constant quiet drain on our biological battery is exactly what we need to look at first. We really have to understand the physical damage of this biological mismatch to fully grasp why the solutions we're going to discuss later are so brutally effective.
Okay, so let's dig into that physical damage. The source text brings up decades of research on something called allostatic load.
Yes.
But before we get into the heavy consequences of it, what is allostatic load in, plain English? Is that just a clinical term for feeling completely burnt out?
It goes much deeper than just an emotional feeling of burnout. Allostatic load refers to the accumulated physiological wear and tear from chronic stress.
The actual wear and tear.
Right. It's the literal biological cost of constantly being on high alert. The findings on this were groundbreaking because they proved that sustained stress doesn't just, change your mood or make you feel tired. It fundamentally reshapes the physical architecture of the brain.
So we aren't just talking about a software issue here. The hardware is literally warping.
Precisely. Under high allostatic load, the hippocampus, which is the region of the brain critical for learning and memory and spatial navigation, it actually shrinks in physical volume.
It shrinks. from stress.
It physically gets smaller.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, which handles complex decision-making and regulating our impulses, that weakens its neural connections. And at the same time, the amygdala,
Which is the fear center, right?
exactly, the
Well,
brain's fear and threat detection center, that part physically grows larger and more reactive.
man, it's like a smartphone with way too many background apps running. You've got like the email app, the news app, social media, and they're all pulling location data constantly.
That's a great way to look at it.
And the processor gets so hot prioritizing those background threats that the main functions, like making a simple phone call or just saving a photo, they just start lagging or crashing entirely. Are we fundamentally incompatible with the modern world we built?
Well, the tragic irony is that the body is simply doing what it was elegantly designed to do, which is adapt to its environment.
Okay,
If the nervous system believes it's in a perpetually dangerous environment, it logically prioritizes the fear center over the memory and reasoning centers.
Right.
I mean, survival comes before complex thought,
Yeah,
right?
right, obviously.
The problem is that in the modern world, we never get the all-clear signal. The alarm just never turns off, and the physical toll is severe. High allostatic load is associated with a 2 to 4 times increased risk of cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, overall mortality.
Wow.
Yeah, today, somewhere between 75 and 90% of all primary care doctor visits are linked to stress-related conditions.
Okay, so if our brains are physically altering because we're stuck in this modern artificial loop, what is the biological signal that tells the body it's safe to repair itself? Like, where does that all-clear signal actually come from?
This is where we move into the biophysics of our planet.
Yeah.
Back in 1952, there was a physicist who mathematically predicted that the space between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere acts as this massive resonant cavity.
Okay, a resonant cavity. What does that mean exactly?
Well, because there are about 2,000 thunderstorms and 50 lightning bolts striking the ground every single second.
Wait, 50 lightning bolts a second? That's happening right now.
Right now, constantly. And because of that, this cavity sustains specific electromagnetic resonances. The primary frequency of this planetary heartbeat is 7.83 hertz.
Here's where it gets really interesting, 7.83 hertz, because the notes highlight that the specific number perfectly aligns with human brainwaves.
Yes.
Are you saying that is a massive cosmic coincidence, or did our brains literally evolve their resting states to match the background noise of the planet?
The evidence strongly points to evolutionary synchronization.
Yeah.
I mean, in human neurobiology, theta brainwaves occur between 4 and 8 hertz.
Okay.
And theta is the state associated with deep meditation, memory consolidation, heightened creativity, that really restorative twilight threshold right between waking and dream.
Oh, I love that feeling.
Right. And then alpha brainwaves, which are linked to relaxed alertness and reduced anxiety, those sit between 8 and 12 hertz. So the Earth's electromagnetic pulse at 7.83 hertz lands precisely at the boundary of these two deeply healing neurological states.
The idea that the planet itself pulses at the exact frequency where the human brain enters its deepest healing mode is just incredible. So what happens when we're completely shielded from it, like in our concrete buildings?
Well, we actually have early experimental data on exactly that scenario. Back in the 60s and 70s, researchers conducted isolation experiments where human subjects lived in underground bunkers.
Okay.
And these bunkers were entirely shielded from the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields.
So 7.83 pulse.
None. And without that pulse, their circadian rhythms became completely desynchronized. Their sleep cycles fragmented, their body temperature regulation went totally chaotic, and their physiological timing essentially just break down.
Just from missing a background frequency.
Yeah. And the moment the researchers secretly reintroduced that specific 7.83 hertz frequency back into the bunker, the subject's circadian rhythms stabilized almost immediately.
Unbelievable. So if the very air around us has this resonant pulse that regulates our biology, what about the ground itself? The text spends a lot of time on the physical act of touching the earth, what's often called earthing or grounding.
Yes. The Earth's surface carries a virtually unlimited supply of free electrons, which means the planet maintains a continuous negative surface charge.
Okay, negative charge, got it.
So when bare human skin makes direct contact with the ground, those electrons flow instantly into the body.
Okay, I have to be the skeptic for a second here.
Go for it.
I understand the concept of a negative charge, but the sources claim this changes everything from cortisol levels to how thick our blood is. How does a microscopic electron traveling from the dirt into my heel actually do anything medically significant to my bloodstream?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it sounds too simple, Mostly because we're conditioned to rely on complex synthetic medical interventions.
Right, true. We want a pill for everything.
Exactly. But the biophysics of it are remarkably straightforward. Throughout the day, normal metabolism, exposure to stress, pollution, all of that creates free radicals in the body.
Right, free radicals. We hear about those in skincare commercials a lot.
Right, and free radicals are essentially unstable molecules that are missing an electron, so that gives them a positive charge. And because they're positively charged, they violently tear through your healthy cells looking for an electron to steal, which causes systemic inflammation. Yeah. But the Earth is basically a planetary-sized battery of negative electrons. When you touch it, you are flooded with free electrons that immediately pair up with and neutralize those positively charged free radicals, stopping that inflammation cascade in its tracks.
So the ground is literally acting as a massive, limitless antioxidant.
Precisely. Let's look at the data measuring this. There was a landmark study that measured 24-hour salivary cortisol profiles. And cortisol is, our primary stress hormone.
Right.
They measured subjects before and after 8 weeks of sleeping grounded. Before the intervention, the participants' cortisol patterns were erratic, like spiking at night when they should be resting, dropping in the morning when they needed energy.
It sounds like modern insomnia.
Exactly. But after 6 weeks of grounding, their cortisol secretion completely resynchronized with a normal, healthy circadian rhythm. 11 of the 12 participants reported falling asleep faster, and all 12 reported significantly less nighttime waking.
Wow. And the sources also detail a study looking at cardiovascular function. They measured red blood cells before and after just 2 hours of grounding and found the average surface charge increased by a factor of 2.7.
Yes, which is huge.
Can you explain the mechanism there? Like, how does a surface charge prevent blood from clumping?
It comes down to something called the zeta potential. Red blood cells naturally have a negative surface charge, which causes them to repel each other, kind of like two identical magnets pushing apart.
Okay, I can visualize that.
When we accumulate too much positive charge from those free radicals in stress, that repulsive force weakens, and the blood cells clump together. This makes the blood thick and viscous, forcing the heart to work much harder to pump it.
That makes sense.
So by flooding the body with negative electrons from the Earth, the zeta potential of the blood cells increases by that 2.7 factor. They repel each other strongly again, meaning the blood literally thins out and flows far more efficiently. And this happens without any pharmaceutical intervention.
That is profound. And the research also showed that just 40 minutes of grounding shifted heart rate variability toward parasympathetic dominance. Let's pause on parasympathetic dominance for a second. For the listener who isn't a neurobiologist, what does that actually feel like in the body?
Sure. So your autonomic nervous system has two main gears. The sympathetic state is your fight or flight mode, so heart racing, shallow breathing, high alertness.
The background app's overheating the phone.
Exactly. Now, the parasympathetic state is the rest and digest mode. It is the physical feeling of letting your guard down. Your heart rate slows, your digestion activates, and your immune system actually sends out repair cells.
And usually that takes a lot of work to get to, right?
Yeah. Achieving parasympathetic dominance usually takes years of dedicated meditation practice. But grounding for 40 minutes triggers it mechanically.
Mechanically. That is amazing. Okay, so we've got the physical ground covered, but the sources also dive heavily into the specific environments we stand in. If we move from the soil beneath our feet up into the air we breathe, we arrive at the science of forest medicine.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts. This brings us to a practice formalized in Japan back in 1982 by their Ministry of Agriculture. It's known as Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing.
Forest bathing, yeah, I've heard that term floating around.
Yeah, indigenous cultures have respected the healing properties of forests for millennia, obviously. But Japan turned it into rigorous public health policy. A major study in 2007 found that a 3-day forest bathing trip increased natural killer cell activity by roughly 50%.
Natural killer cells being the immune system's frontline assassins against tumors and viruses, right?
Exactly.
A 50% jump is massive. But I have to ask the obvious question here. If I go on a 3-day hike through the woods, my heart rate is elevated, I'm sweating, I'm getting fresh air and solid cardio, isn't it just the physical exercise making my immune system stronger? Like, why are we giving the credit to the trees?
And that is exactly the variable the researchers needed to isolate. They found it is not the exercise, it's the biochemical environment of the forest itself.
Really?
The mechanism involves something called phytoncides. These are antimicrobial, volatile, organic compounds, things like alpha-pine, beta-pine, limon, Trees naturally emit these airborne chemicals to protect themselves from insects, bacteria, and rot.
Oh, wow.
So when we walk in a forest, we're literally breathing in the tree's immune system.
Wait, pause. How does a chemical compound that a pine tree uses to fight off bark beetles somehow end up multiplying cancer-fighting cells in my human bloodstream? What is the actual biological bridge between my lungs and my immune system here?
It happens through the olfactory system. So when you inhale phytoncides, they bind to receptors in your nasal cavity. The olfactory nerve provides a direct, unshielded pathway to the brain, specifically the limbic system, which controls emotion, and the autonomic nervous system.
Right, directly to the brain.
Straight there. The brain registers these specific chemical signatures and immediately signals the endocrine system to drop stress hormone production. As cortisol drops, the immune system, which is normally suppressed by high stress, is given the biological green light to produce those natural killer cells.
But how did they prove it wasn't the walking?
Oh, they did a brilliant study in a standard urban hotel room. No forest required, no hiking, zero cardio. They just exposed subjects to vaporized Hinoki cypress oil. And just breathing the vaporized phytoncides significantly boosted their natural killer cell activity.
So the air itself is the medicine. That is incredible. But I can hear the listener thinking, I don't have 3 days to spend walking in the woods or a hotel room to vaporize cypress oil in. What is the actual dose required to see a baseline shift in health?
The dose-response threshold is remarkably accessible, thankfully. A massive 2019 study analyzed nearly 20,000 participants, and they found that exactly 120 minutes a week in nature is the threshold for significant, measurable improvements in health and psychological well-being.
120 minutes a week.
Yeah, anything less doesn't quite move the needle, but once you hit 120 minutes, the benefits lock in. That breaks down to roughly 17 minutes a day.
17 minutes. That's like walking the dog.
Exactly. And to further cement the fact that physical exertion isn't the primary driver, we can look at a classic hospital study from 1984. They observed patients recovering from gallbladder surgery. Patients who merely had a window view of deciduous trees recovered nearly a full day faster and required significantly fewer heavy pain medications than patients whose window faced a brick wall.
Just looking at trees.
Yes, the visual cue of nature alone initiated the healing response.
Man. Okay, so we've talked about touch, we've talked about smell and sight. But the notes have this whole fascinating section on a primal trigger that bypasses our conscious brain entirely, which is the sounds we hear.
Yes, and to understand the profound impact of sound, we rely on polyvagal theory. It provides this sophisticated framework connecting what we hear directly to nervous system regulation. They identified that the tiny muscles in our middle ear actually act as a biological safety detection system.
Okay, middle ear muscles.
Right, and these muscles are innervated by cranial nerves that share direct neural pathways with the ventral vagal complex.
Before we go further, what exactly is the ventral vagal complex doing for us?
The ventral vagal complex is the branch of the nervous system responsible for feeling safe, socially engaged, connected. When it's active, your heart rate is steady, your facial expressions are relaxed, and you just feel a sense of calm presence.
So our ear muscles are basically acting like a biological radio dial. When we feel safe, the dial is locked onto the human voice frequency so we can connect with each other. But the second we feel stressed, the dial automatically spins away from human connection to pick up the low rumbles of a predator or the high-pitched shriek of an alarm.
That is a perfect analogy. Under threat, the muscle tension in the ear physically alters. It reduces sensitivity to the comforting frequencies of human speech and becomes hypervigilant to the acoustic signatures of danger. And the sources point out that our biology universally recognizes one specific acoustic pattern as the ultimate signal of safety.
Which is?
Descending pitch contours. Sounds that start high and smoothly go low.
Which explains why infant-directed speech, like the way we instinctively talk to babies to soothe them, uses those descending sing-song pitch contours across literally every culture on Earth.
Research in psychoacoustics confirms it totally. Listening to descending pitch contours physically decreases heart rate, reduces skin conductance, meaning you sweat less, and increases heart rate variability.
Wow.
Yeah, the evolutionary logic is deeply ingrained in us. In both human vocalizations and animal calls, our rising pitch signals alertness, escalation, and potential threat. A descending pitch signals completion, exhaustion of the threat, resolution, and safety.
So what does this all mean? This perfectly frames that fascinating recent Stanford study. They took over 100 participants and had them practice cyclic physiological sighing for just 5 minutes a day over almost a month. And the results showed it was actually more effective at reducing acute stress than a formal mindfulness meditation practice.
Yes, because a physiological sigh is fundamentally a vocal exhalation that naturally follows that vital descending pitch contour.
If I think about it, the physiological sigh is that universal sound you make when you finally sit down on the couch after a long, grueling day. It's that double inhale and then a long descending ha out.
Exactly.
But let's be critical here. How can a simple 5-minute sigh possibly outperform weeks of formal mindfulness meditation? Because meditation is like the gold standard for stress reduction.
This raises an important question. Meditation is highly effective, but we must acknowledge the mechanics of it. Meditation requires top-down cognitive effort. You have to focus your mind, sit still, notice your thoughts, actively manage your attention.
Right, it's work.
It is. But a descending pitch contour, on the other hand, is a bottom-up intervention. It speaks the raw, biological language of the nervous system. It's an ancient evolutionary signal to that ventral vagal complex that the threat has passed.
So it skips the brain entirely.
Exactly. It works faster than meditation because it bypasses the conscious thinking brain entirely. Your nervous system physically hears that descending tone and immediately initiates a cascade of calming physiological responses before you even have a chance to think about it. It is literally an evolutionary override switch.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's distill the key takeaways from all these converging scientific fields. We started with the terrifying reality of our modern mismatch, spending 93% of our lives indoors, accumulating allostatic load that physically shrinks our hippocampi, and living in a constant state of low-level panic driven by our screens.
But the prescription is ancient, and the required dose is incredibly small.
Right. Just 17 minutes a day in nature provides measurable, lasting well-being benefits. 40 minutes standing barefoot on the earth neutralizes free radicals and shifts your entire nervous system into a state of rest and repair, drastically thinning out viscous blood.
And breathing the phytoncides of a forest boosts your cancer-fighting immune cells by 50%, and that protection lasts for a full month.
And just 5 minutes of sighing using that descending pitch contour is enough to hit the biological brakes on acute stress faster than formal meditation.
The most compelling insight from Rooted in Resonance isn't any single one of these studies in isolation. It's the convergence of all of them. Earthing, forest bathing, the Schumann resonance, polyvagal sound processing, they all point to one undeniable biological truth. The human nervous system was built for constant contact with the natural world, and it begins healing the very moment that contact is restored.
And to you, listening right now, I want to emphasize something uniquely beautiful from the text. The Earth isn't keeping a tally. It doesn't care that you've spent the last 10 years staring at a screen in a sterile cubicle.
No, not at all.
It isn't holding a grudge about your daily screen time average. It is just waiting, steady, and resonant for you to step outside and take your shoes off.
Our biology is incredibly resilient when given the correct environmental inputs. We do not need to invent complex new solutions to find health. We simply need to return to the environment we were engineered for.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on today. It makes you wonder about the trajectory of human progress. We spend billions of dollars globally on health apps, synthetic supplements, and high-tech biohacking gear to optimize our biology and manage our modern stress.
Billions.
But if our nervous systems are this deeply, inextricably synced to the Earth's specific frequencies, its free electrons, and the chemical signatures of its plants, what happens as we move toward a multiplanetary future?
Oh, that is such a profound question for space exploration.
Exactly. If we ever colonize Mars, a planet entirely devoid of the Schumann resonance, without free electrons in its dust, and with absolutely no phytoncides in its artificial air, will human biology fundamentally break down under the allostatic load?
Wow.
Or will we have to build our space colonies as exact synthetic replicas of the Earth's frequencies just to keep our minds from unraveling? It begs the question, are we just intelligent creatures who happen to live on Earth, or are we literally an extension of the planet itself?